The darkness that night was heavier than usual, as if the moon had turned its back on the village of Umueke. The only light came from flickering oil lamps, their glow casting strange, dancing shadows on the mud walls. A crowd of elders sat in a circle beneath the iroko tree, their faces tense as the drummers prepared the udu and the gangan. Tonight, the spirits would be summoned, and answers demanded. As the rhythmic beating began, I, Nkem, was drawn back to the event that changed my family forever. 2 months earlier, the marketplace had been alive with noise and color. Traders called out their wares, goats bleated, and the air smelled of roasting corn. My sister, Adeabi, wove through the crowd with a basket on her head, her laughter as bright as the morning sun. She was the heart of our family, kind, strong-willed, and full of life. At the edge of the market, an old woman stood hunched over, her face shadowed by a faded wrapper. She reached out a trembling hand. "My daughter," she croaked, "spare me some yam." Adeabi hesitated, then handed over a small tuber from her basket. The woman accepted it with a strange smile, her teeth yellowed and uneven. "You are kind," she murmured, "but beware of kindness given in ignorance." Adeabi returned home unusually quiet that evening. By the next morning, she was gone. The village searched for her tirelessly. The hunters combed the dense forest, the women wailed at the shrine of Amedioho, begging for her safe return. Days turned into weeks, and still, there was no trace of her. It wasn't until the chief priest consulted the spirits that we learned the chilling truth. "She is alive," he said, his voice heavy with foreboding. "But she walks in the shadow of the restless dead." The elders whispered of the Oho Onya, spirits who wandered between worlds, preying on the kind-hearted. Some claimed the old woman at the market had been a sorceress who marked Adeabi for her own dark purposes. Others believed Adeabi had unknowingly crossed a boundary between the living and the dead. That night, under the iroko tree, the drummers played to summon the spirits. The priest poured libations, chanting prayers to the gods. As the drum beats grew louder, the ground seemed to tremble. Then, abruptly, the drumming stopped. A cold wind swept through the gathering, extinguishing the lamps. In the eerie silence, a voice emerged, not from any person, but from the gangan drum itself. "She stands at the edge of 2 worlds," it intoned. "To bring her back, one must walk her path and face what she faced." The priest turned to me. "Nkem," he said gravely, "it must be you." My protest died in my throat. The villagers tied a charm around my wrist and handed me a staff adorned with feathers and cowries. "Enter the forest before dawn," the priest instructed. "Whatever happens, do not look back." The forest was alive with unnatural whispers. Shadows danced at the edge of my vision, and the air felt thick, as though it resisted my every step. Clutching the staff, I followed a faint trail until I reached a clearing. There she was. Adeabi stood in the center, her back to me. She wore the same wrapper she had left home in, but her feet hovered inches above the ground. "Adeabi," I called softly. She turned, and my heart froze. Her eyes were hollow, dark pits where no light could enter or escape. She raised a hand, beckoning me closer. I stepped forward, but the ground beneath me shifted. The air filled with a low hum, growing louder and louder. The charm on my wrist began to burn, and the staff in my hand glowed faintly. "Adeabi!" I shouted. Her hollow eyes flickered, and for a moment, they filled with something familiar, fear. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Now it will take you instead." The shadows around her surged toward me, their shapes shifting and riding. The charm on my wrist burned hotter, and I thrust the staff into the ground. A blinding light erupted from it, pushing the shadows back. Adeabi collapsed to the ground, her body limp but breathing. I rushed to her side, but the air around me grew colder. A deep, guttural voice echoed through the forest. One death exchanged for another, it growled. I grabbed Adeabi and began to run. The forest seemed endless, the trees closing in around us. The voice followed, its laughter chilling my blood. As we broke through the tree line into the village, the voice faded, but its presence lingered in my mind. The villagers cheered as I carried Adeabi to safety, but the priest's face remained grim. She is free, he said quietly, but the spirit will not rest. It now seeks another. I felt a chill run through me as the charm on my wrist crumbled to